Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. I'm so glad you're with us. Whether you're joining us here on the airwaves in Santa Barbara, California, or joining us all around the world at goodlifetelevision.org and all these social media platforms, we're seeing that so many of you are finding us in our podcast, which is Good Life Conversations. I think from 34 countries, we welcome you. We're so glad you're with us. We're talking about the good stuff. We're here to inspire and uplift. We get to hear from some great people. And if you go to goodlifetelevision.org, you can actually see all the long-form interviews of these wonderful folks. We also break them up into what we call power clips, so you can watch those, and you can also find us or follow us on all the social media platforms. We hope you will. I'm really excited about my guest today. Debbie Roberts Loucks is with me. Welcome.
Very good, thank you. I'm so happy
I got the
to
pronunciation
be here.
right. We worked on the pronunciation
it's a toughie,
before.
Isn't it? Yeah.
I have been following Debbie and learning about her family for the last, I guess, year or so, and we're going to get into that. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing family. What you guys have done, what your parents have done, what you're doing is really wonderful, and we'll get into that in a second. But I wanted to start with just your life. You grew up at Flag Is Up Farms.
Pretty much, yeah.
North of where we're sitting.
When we moved to there in the 60s, yeah.
Okay, so tell us about that. What was that like growing
Moving
up?
there
Yeah.
and being there. Pretty revolutionary, actually. Solvang was a sleepy little, wasn't even a horse town, really. It was pretty much a tourist town, and they grew flowers where the farm is now.
Oh, they did?
So I can't say that we were real popular when we plowed it under, but it became a state-of-the-art thoroughbred racing farm that Dad had traveled the world actually to pick up the best tips and the best construction ideas and everything for horses. So it was really state-of-the-art at the time. And he had a partner who also lived in Santa Barbara, Montecito, who owned a Juniper Farms. It was a nursery, and they had tons of trees that they needed to liquidate. And there are now about 250,000 trees on about 100 acres.
Are there really?
It's beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So let's get into the story. And Monty Roberts is your father,
Yes.
and Pat is your mother.
Yes.
And Monty Roberts it's a fascinating story. He was the original horse whisperer, that they call.
That's what they say.
That's what they say. So this is just to give the audience a little context in terms of so Monty began. Well, I read that he was on a horse. He won some kind of contest when he was 4 years old.
Oh, yeah. He likes to say he didn't get in the horse business until he was about 3 or 4.
That's right. and so his dad had kind of trained horses the traditional way, which tends to be kind of, there's a little violence to it. There's a lot.
Yeah.
And so he was raised with that.
Absolutely.
And in terms of how you break a horse or whatever. And I read a quote.
Perfect word.
That's
it's
what they
still
do.
the word that's used.
Yeah,
today.
to break a horse.
To break a horse.
Which does sound violent.
Pretty much.
And I read a quote from, I don't know if it was your dad or somebody else, but they were talking about, a good trainer can get a horse to do almost anything. A great trainer can cause the horse to want to do it.
Absolutely.
But he really revolutionized. He had a different approach.
He did.
A gentle approach that towards horses that has had a huge impact worldwide. I think he was knighted or something by the Queen. I mean,
you fast forward to the story pretty fast, but you're exactly right. He would still be probably a large trainer in the thoroughbred industry, a small trainer on the world stage today, if it hadn't been for the Queen in 1989. But to take the fork in the road back, it really goes back to when he is not more than 7, 8 years old. And he's finding, not only is his father tough on horses, he's pretty tough on his kids too. He had a younger brother who was not so much subjected, but he was certainly the oldest one and is supposed to step in every footstep that Grandpa made, right? And he was a big, strong, he became a cop when the war took over the equestrian center. And so it's really easy to see how that violence manifested. It was a tough time. It was he was born in 1935. Dad was born in 1935. So when the war breaks out, he's about that age, right? So they lived, my grandfather was the head of an equestrian center there in Salinas, which was pretty much the head of horses in the western United States. So they were pretty front and center on all that.
Yeah.
And when the war broke out, you can look into history, but that equestrian center, the Salinas Rodeo Grounds, they called it,
Right.
became the internment camp for the Japanese American citizens that lived right there.
Wow.
My dad literally saw friends of his in his class stay there.
Wow.
All the stalls became a family in each. There was a trench down the middle of the equestrian center, and that became the toilet. And big wires and walls were put around, wire fences. And Dad moved into the only house that he's ever lived in with numbers on it, as he tells the story. And my grandfather became a motorcycle cop. And so he kind of transferred what he did with the horses, which was tough, but it was traditional. I mean, he didn't do anything
Right.
differently than his
Right.
father before him and probably generationally before him. The difference he made, which was interesting, is he wrote a book. And I'm really glad he did. And it was mostly photos, which I'm really glad he did, because I don't think most people would even believe that that's what traditional horsemanship is. But he literally quantified traditional horsemanship. In 1957 is when the book came out.
Wow.
So that is 65 years ago, right? It's not that long ago.
No,
I
it's
mean,
not.
horse training has been going on for 6,000 years for
6,000,
sure, right?
Yeah.
And that's domestication. And so I like to call it the second oldest profession, because really all our transportation, all our farming, all our everything came from horses at one point or another from
Right.
Europe, starting over, the Roman times. Look at that. Roads
Wow.
were defined by the wheels on the carriages and those things that moved things. It literally defined our railroad system in the United States if you search back through history. So anyway.
Wow.
That's the history of it.
Yeah.
And so you can't blame these people who know no other methods.
Right.
But once you know better,
Right.
you can change people's minds through education.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're in the business of doing.
Yeah.
Is educating and equipping with that education. So you can no longer say that's not the right thing to do when you can find the right thing to do.
And did the light bulb just go on for Monty one
did.
day? I mean, how did this happen?
It did slightly incrementally, but in a short time for a kid, because he noticed that the horses were responding to his gentleness as opposed to my grandfather's beating him into submission. And he felt the same way as a kid, too. He didn't feel like it was encouraging him to learn things when he's having it beat into him,
Right.
and told that he must or I'll hurt you.
Right.
And so one of Dad's most famous quotes is, "No one of us was born with the right to say you must or I'll hurt you to any other living being." Violence is always
Seems
for
so
the
obvious,
violator,
doesn't it?
right? It's
Yeah.
always for the violator and never for the victim.
You must or I'll hurt you. So your dad as a boy, he's interacting with horses differently, and he's trying a gentle approach, and he's saying they're responding to
works.
this. So maybe they respond to the
Yeah.
you must or I'll hurt you
They
approach.
do.
They do.
They
'Cause
do
have to.
respond. I mean, that's performance for 6,000 years.
That's how it's been
right?
done. But
Just
your
not
dad sees
willingly.
this different.
That's why he won 11 World Championships. My grandfather did not win those championships.
Your dad won those championships with his approach.
Exactly.
So this is like, this is amazing. So there's a guy who has done work with brain injuries out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We've been I got to meet him. I think about him when I think about your dad. His name is Glenn Doman. And he had this approach to education. He had this approach to treating children with special needs, brain injuries, and how we can help well children learn to
good.
read. And
Yeah.
and he named his publishing company. He's written lots of books, and this guy's a genius as it relates to the brain. But he named his publishing company Gentle Revolution Press,
Oh, that's nice.
because he thought if we do take a different approach
Right.
with some of these things, there can be sort of a gentle revolution, which is in contrast to let's fight and let's have wars and let's have.
Exactly.
What if we went love and understanding, and I learned about you and you learned about me?
Yeah.
But it reminds me of when I think about what I'm learning about your dad.
That's intuitive to say, you know, it's intuitive to say, wouldn't you respond better to gentle? But a lot of people will say to you, well, what does that look like? How
Right.
does that work? I don't get it.
Yeah.
You know, ultimately, aren't you going to have to discipline? Aren't you going to have to force? Aren't you going to have to say, draw a line in the sand?
So what's the answer to that?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
The answer I like to give, depending on the context of what we're talking about, if your kid tears toward the street and you know they're going to run out in front of a car, you grab them and you pull them back.
Yeah.
That's fair,
Right.
right?
Right.
It might be rough, it might be gruff, it might be violent in some, but nobody would blame you for that, right? You just saved their life.
Yeah.
Then if you turn and whack on them and say, you know, don't ever do that again or I'll kill you, or whatever silly thing we do, they're not going to learn from that. Now you might say, well, they're 3 or whatever. But by the time they're 5, they know better. So let's look at it differently. Let's look at discipline differently. And perhaps this is how we use Equus, the flight animal, or is maybe a child a flight animal too? Do they fear things first? Do they want security first? Absolutely. You know, that's what a child is looking for. That's not any different really than a flight animal. So the big difference in what we kind of live with in animals is that most people are around carnivores, aren't they? Their motivation is to earn their food. And if that's a behavior, that's all they really seek as an animal, then we're used to performance. We're used to, well, if you do this trick, I'll give you a piece of cheese or something. Nah, mom's dog will sell his soul for a piece of cheese. He really will. You know, he just will do anything you want. A horse isn't like that. A flight animal isn't like that. A deer isn't like that. You know, anything that would rather be secure and flee, anything new, neophobic, that's a different set of motivations. And you and I can't force that because their first effort is to flee until they can trust you. So when you think through that lens, violence only validates what they think of us already, right? They think of us as a predator. So if you hurt them or do anything that they perceive as forced or hurt, you've just proved them right. So the whole system of training through force is backwards. They're wonderful and compliant. That's what I love about horses. They're super generous. They want to please us. They're herd animals. And we got that going for us as humans because they really want to be with another living being more than away from. Unfortunately, we take advantage of that. And I think children are a little bit like that too. Their first effort is to hide, flee, to get away from all the consternation. And they really want to secure. I mean, the foster system is really tough that way, right? They lose a lot of that security and they don't know who to communicate with. And most often they isolate, even if it's just inside themselves, even if it's behind a facade of aggressiveness.
Right.
It can still be a form of isolation.
That is really interesting. And so what, for someone who's watching this, practically speaking, what does it look like? Your dad's approach, just on the ground with the horses, what happens?
Yeah. Well, the most beautiful thing that happens is we trust the horse and the horse trusts us. So how do you create that before you mess anything up?
Right. And
you force a horse to do something that they think is going to kill them. And that's the way they think. It's either they're going to live or they're going to die. And it's just a flight animal. So if you can prove they're not going to die, then you've earned their trust. And if we put them in a round pen, you remember they express themselves through flight. A round pen, all that does is keep the energy flowing, doesn't it? So they don't have corners to hide in or duck away from us. So when they can go ahead and express that, then Dad will take them into a round pen. Their flight distance for a horse is generally about 1/4 of a mile. So you know that if you let them express themselves one side, going one direction, then they turn around and you turn them around and express themselves in the second direction. Now they start to negotiate. It's no different than a Mustang out on the desert. They'll go for a quarter of a mile and then they'll start to bend around. All of their life is in arcs. All flight animals is in arcs. They want to come back around. There's a few reasons that we probably can guess why. You can go into another predator's territory, and that might be dangerous again. They've also run out of energy at that point too, you know, and they could be dragging into another predator's territory. But in the round pen together with a horse, he begins to think, well, you haven't killed me yet. You haven't even hurt me yet. Let me start to communicate with you. Now, they have a very specific set of circumstances that they communicate in. And it's a conversation, so it's not always in the same order, but it's basically 4 things. The first thing you look for, you ready? So we got to picture ourselves in a round pen with a horse going pretty fast around you, and you're in the center. The first thing you look for is the inside ear of that horse looking at you. So the eye goes where the ear goes. It's kind of cool. So you can kind of see where their attention lays. Remember, they're a flight animal, so they don't see in depth like we do. They see peripherally better than us, right? So this eye and this ear will be looking at you in the center of that round pen when you're going like this. And then if you turn them, you'll watch that other ear lock on you too. So that's usually the first gesture. Then looking at you with that ear. With that inside ear. The other ear will kind of wave back and forth generally and listen for peripheral sounds in case all of a sudden they have to prioritize differently, right? But that inside ear means they've got respect for you, attention to you, and you are an interest to them. Probably more than anything else, even if people are sitting around the wall when we're demonstrating, we might have 50 to 75 people around the wall, they're locked on that predator in the center of the ring, right? And so the next thing you look for is a relaxation because they haven't died yet, right? And that's licking and chewing, and it's sometimes lowering the head, one order or the other. I'd say licking and chewing has a slight edge on that. And the licking and chewing it's that adrenaline dropping. And it's like suddenly you have a dry mouth because you're afraid, and then you're okay. It's like that. Because it's a real defined licking and chewing, like, oh my goodness. And then the lowering of the head is the same thing. It's that adrenaline made them go up, and their eyesight is interesting too, how they adjust their eyesight. And it's very high until they start to relax, then they'll go down. But they'll literally run their nose down along the soil and say, I'm really relaxed over here. Are you gonna leave me alone? I'm feeling a little vulnerable, but I'm also willing to negotiate with you as to whether or not you're going to partner with me. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
And the last thing is, and we teach people how to do this, so it's going to be a little, I have to be good with my words here to describe it, but the last thing you want to do is decide when that horse is ready to come to you. So that moving towards you, the circle gets a little bit smaller, and you watch for that. So now you've got ear locked on, smaller circle, licking and chewing, head dropping, they're ready. And we teach, and we can teach this to veterans, we can teach this to at-risk youth. We have a program for 14 to 24 that this is what you and I should work with, I think.
Yeah.
And they will invite that horse by turning a 45 degree so they can see that horse out of the peripheral. They'll relax those shoulders. They're not like a predator anymore. They're going to relax their shoulders. They're going to tuck those fingers in. This looks very predatorial. They're going to tuck those fingers in, avert their eyes so we're not piercing them with our eyes. And that beautiful moment is we just stand in the middle of the round pen and that horse will say, I believe you. We breathe, belly breathe down low, get that diaphragmatic breathing going like a singer learns, you know? And that horse will come right to you and just be right at the edge of your shoulder. That blows people away. Blows them away.
I saw that when I was up there.
Yes, you did. You saw it with veterans, didn't you?
I saw some veterans that were there. It's mind-boggling.
It is.
Yeah. It touches you.
It does.
And you've been doing this a while. I mean, this still touches you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really powerful.
Was it for you?
It was. Oh, yeah. I mean, I've just never seen anything like that before.
There isn't anything like that.
Yeah.
People don't know about it, and they should. it'll affect people because you can do that with people too.
Talk about that. Talk about that.
Why would we be in people's faces when they already think that we're maybe aggressive or a predator?
Adversarial.
Exactly. How does that get our point across? Can we soften up? Can we use our own body language? Even though it's predator on predator,
Right.
and they're not a flight animal, but what if it's a child?
Right.
What if it's an abused woman? What if it's a veteran with post-traumatic stress who's just done with people?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better if we expressed ourselves like we would express with a horse in the round pen? We call it join up. And I think it's the perfect expression.
Yeah.
Now, we also have a program for the kids, 14 to 24 that I was talking about. We call it lead up, because there's a special kind of join up, I think, that happens with them. Because often we'll have these kids that are the aggressors. They're the head of the gang. They're the head of, we piloted this in Guatemala. So they were the leader of the community. It's a very war-torn country, very young population. The oldsters are killed off, right? Really are. It's very violent. So the 25-year-old is running the communities up there. And he usually is the biggest, baddest kid.
Fear.
Who has the biggest, baddest horse. Horses are, you know, a form of agriculture there, and also a form of status. It'd be like the boldest car that you could buy if you're a kid.
Yeah.
But their horses are often abused because they don't know any better.
Yeah.
So then they're angry about that too. And we found they were killing their horses, which didn't get them any further. So we piloted this program in 2012. Now, we didn't talk about the Queen in 1989. But the Queen in 1989 put Dad on the road. And for 30 years, he's been touring, demonstrating what I just showed you about. And then you can take that to remedial issues and other things too. But what that did was manifest in 2010 our Horse Sense and Healing for veterans with post-traumatic stress. And out of that was manifest the lead-up program for the youth. And we have an expat from England living in Guatemala who is an advanced instructor of ours, advanced student at the time and then became an instructor. And she said, Debbie, this works with our biggest and baddest down here. Because the difference is they have to learn to be gentle. They have to learn to teach that there is trust between animal and human.
Yeah.
And if they can learn that, they can actually become better leaders in the community. So we want to find these kids, and now we're doing it here. 2017 we launched here. We want to find these kids that are either going to go and do big things the wrong way,
Right.
or big things the right way,
Right.
and better for them. So we're not taking, our program is not designed for the 7-year-old who's, a victim of domestic abuse. It's the 16-year-old who might have perpetrated it, but he's leading the family and he's leading the family astray, or she is. And we get a split, pretty much a split thing. We've had rival gangs together in the same program. We work with 10 or less kids in a program at a time. And it's just a 2 or 3 day program depending on their timing. But we've literally had rival gangs come in there and go like, what's this, And the horse is the common language. Suddenly we'll demonstrate, what's going on in the round pen and say, you're going to be doing this by this afternoon. Suddenly that big, strapping guy is paying real close attention to the gestures that he's going to have to use to keep a 1,000-pound animal that can go 30, 35 miles an hour around in a round pen.
Right.
He's no match.
Right.
Right?
So what is that kid, so the young people or the gang leader or whatever, what do they typically leave with? I mean, what have they learned, or what's happened to
Great
them?
question. I think the most surprising thing to me is they all want to be horse trainers. They're like, this is cool.
Yeah.
I want to be a horse trainer. I can control this animal. But
Yeah.
we say, you're not controlling him because you couldn't. He's 1,000 pounds. You can't control him.
Right.
You're communicating with him. You're teaching him. You're training him. You're partnering with him even. Oh, I want to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, where else in a species can we cross-communicate in species? I can't bark like a dog so he understands what I'm saying.
Right.
I can't meow. I can't do anything in another animal's language except this.
So
It's
the
a
horse
gestural language.
It's really unique.
It totally unique. Horses whinny, and that's a location device, really. I'm over here. But they really are completely silent other than that. Their communication system is like signing for the deaf.
Yeah.
So it's a really cool thing to be able to communicate with an animal and know you're doing it because you're affecting them and you can see it. Sometimes we get the kids that'll drop to their knees. They're so emotional. And then sometimes they're like, I can do this. And they're very encouraged by it and feel confident. It builds confidence. I think that's a surprising thing too, is how confident after 2 days these guys can be with a 1,000-pound animal.
In a different way.
In a very different.
Not
Well, they didn't even know
domination.
they didn't even know they could pick up feet. So we teach them how to pick up feet and groom and and be around a horse safely. So actually, they come out after a couple of days being probably the best volunteer any equine therapeutic could ever have, right?
Yeah.
Now they understand, don't be violent with a horse, and here's why. You can't force them to do anything. You can cajole them, you can ask, you can partner with them, and you can even discipline. Horses do respond to work. And if you had asked me, how did my dad discipline us? I'd say, darn it, he disciplined us with work. I would much rather he had yelled at us or wrapped our knuckles or anything. But no, when you have to go pick up buckets and buckets of rocks in an arena, you go like, oh, I'll never do that again.
I had my kids cut the grass with scissors one time.
Oh, that's a good one.
Was one of my favorites. Yeah.
Clean the shower with a toothbrush. Yeah, that's it.
We're almost out of time. So the organization is called Join Up. That's a nonprofit organization at Flag is Up Farms under Monty Roberts is still there and his incredible wife, Pat.
Yeah.
Join Up is the nonprofit that's doing this work with veterans, with young people, and using these principles that they've learned to change people's lives. It really does.
100%.
I did get to witness that, and so, but what an amazing thing.
I love sharing it. People are welcome to come too. This is one of those big farms with a gate on the front. Our insurance tells us to keep the gate closed because the horses will get out. So, but please don't, be a stranger. We love sharing it with our community. I think it's really important that the community knows what we're doing out there. They'll bring their out-of-town guests, but they'll also understand what we're trying to do to revolutionize this training of horses and people.
It's called Flag is Up Farms here in the north of Santa Barbara. So if you're local, you definitely want to check it out. Thanks. Yeah, it is a revolutionary thought. This. I think about Jesus, but I think about gentleness. This gentleness. What a way, what a new way.
Yes.
From this kind of, we tend to think in terms of these two sides to the, war or just lay down, but there's a middle way.
100%.
Gentleness.
Jesus wasn't soft-spoken about what he believed in.
Right.
Right? He did not come to make peace with everybody.
Yeah.
He came to make a point. Yeah. And I think it's time people make a point in how to work with and train horses and flight animals and kids.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks for letting me be a voice here.
Yeah, absolutely. And please give your parents our best.
I will, Dean. Thank you.
God bless you guys. Thank you.
God bless you.
Thanks for joining us. See you next time.